Welcome to the session. Good to see you all. Hi, Jonas. Nice wave. Hi, Ed. Making a valiant bid to absorb as much solution focus as possible in a week. Hi, Stephen. Good to see you again. Hope all is well with you and your many activities, some of which we may get to hear about as the day progresses. And welcome, everyone. So Mark and I are going to invite you to join us on an exploration, discovery, discussion, Q&A about what we've been doing with this book, The Solutions Focus. Mark, welcome, and first thoughts. First slide.
First slide. Well, this is the key information. The new edition of this focus book, the is published in the UK. The 9th, you can pre-order it already at thesolutionsfocus.com. And when we talk about the journey we've had to this point, it's 22 years since the first edition of the book came out, which is a long time, and it's very gratified that the publishers think that it's still relevant. And indeed, they were very keen to do a new edition. The US edition and the audiobook will be out on the 17th of September. And you'll notice, if you're watching closely, will notice that it's a new subtitle, Transforming Change for Coaches, Leaders, and Consultants. And that, of course, is a double-edged subtitle. It's about how, as a coach, leader, and consultant, you can do transforming change, but it's also changing the way we think about change for many people in the coaching, leading, and consulting arenas. And the way that solution-focused practice embraces what have been trends towards emergence and dialogic practice over the last 2 decades is astonishing. It was already doing that when Stephen Insu were doing it, but the kind of background that we have to those fields now wasn't there. And our book tried to do that first and second time around, but now that those fields have developed much more, we can position the book much more in that landscape. So that's one of the things that we're excited about.
So we saw Stephen Insu videos of them there. We both knew them, probably you better than I did, but they were doing their thing, and their form of solution-focused brief therapy was happening and gaining some traction in parts of the world, bits of Europe, parts of America, but not huge or changing things for that many people. And then you and I came along rather strangely, because neither of us are therapists, either by background or currently, into this world of therapy that was doing, in this one part of it, these new, radical and exciting things. How did you come across that, spot it, and pick up a baton that eventually led to the book?
So I had just gone self-unemployed, as I joke these days. I just left a proper job in the nuclear power industry, become an independent consultant. And a few months into that, I got wind through the AMED network that a guy called James Wilk was doing a session in London on organizational change with minimal intervention. And I thought, oh, that looks interesting. I'll go along. And I went, and what Wilk had been the therapist in residence in the mid-1980s for a year at Milwaukee. But what he was doing wasn't really solution-focused practice. It was more like what might be thought of as strategic therapy today. It's much more expert-driven. But he was interesting, and he was doing a lot of quoting of Bateson and Erickson and those things. And I was very intrigued, and I hung around to talk to him after the session while people dispersed. And it was a very hot day, and I was wearing a very thick woolen suit. And I promptly collapsed and fainted with overdoing it. And he and his oppo were the only people left in the building. So they had to call the ambulance. And the ambulance came and picked me up and said, "No, you're all right. Drink a glass of water." And Wilt gave me a lift to the station and suggested I read his book, which I took on holiday to the Picos de Europa that summer. And I still have it. It's called Shifting Contexts by James Wilk and Bill O'Hanlon. some of you will recognize the name of Bill O'Hanlon as one of the first solution-focused therapists alongside Steve and Insoo. And I read this book, and I still have it. It's covered in pencil marks inside saying, yes, 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 underline, underline, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. It was so crunchy. And it wasn't really proper solution focused yet. It was 1987, and they were still inventing it at Milwaukee. But it had so many things like customers for change and detail and description and other stuff. And so I came back to London and said to a friend, "Oh, I've got this book." And he said, "Oh, with Bill O'Hanlon's coming to do a workshop, brief therapy practice, go along." So I went. And of course, Bill was excellent. Bill could talk the hind legs off a donkey, and he's a lovely man. He's now a songwriter in Nashville, which is a marvelous thing to be doing. And the brief guys ran a networking exercise, and we by geography. And I went and wrote my name on the southwest of England list, which is where I was living at the time, and you were too. And the only other name on the list was Harry Norman, who some people with long memories may remember was also a kind of he was a therapist, but he was a lively mind, and I'm still in touch with him a bit. And we formed the Bristol Solutions Group, me, Harry, and Jenny, in our living room on the 1st of April 1994, as a cross-networking therapists, coaches, consultants, anyone who the hell wants to come along, monthly public meeting to talk about solution-focused practice. And they do say, if you want to learn something, teach it. And so that was kind of how we started, Jenny and I, with Harry Norman, in that setting. And the only way to learn it at that point was to go to therapy workshops, because that's all there was. So we went to train with Brief, as you did, and lots of people have done subsequently. We also went to a conference in 1994 in the States and met Steve and Insoo. And I have my signed copy of Words Are Originally Magic. And I went up to Steve and got him to sign the book, which he did without comment, of course. And I said, "Gather, you're coming to London in September. Perhaps we could have a pint." And he says, "If you're in the right company, maybe 2 pints." And when we met him, we interviewed him, Harry and Jenny and I, and then started to get interested in this. I could immediately see there's great potential for this in the organizational change world, where they were very problem focused. They still are. But, there's a whole kind of thing about you make people better by talking about their weaknesses and insulting them with them, no. There's a much better way of doing it, which is not only nicer, but it's quicker, it's more effective. It's drawing on strengths, looking for exceptions, looking for what success would look like, all that kind of stuff. And then we started doing bits of it, I think, together.
We did
on some courses and facilitating some workshops and things like that.
We titled those first courses. So Mark and I had been working together and with Jenny for a while with conventional organizational training, or unusual organizational training, but under conventional titles like training trainers and presentation skills. And you'd invited me to the Bristol Solutions Group, again, as mentioned, as a non-therapist, but interested in the ideas and fascinated by them. So I started reading the books and also did a 4-day training with Brief Therapy Practice in London, and realized that we could be using this in our work. If it worked in therapy, then it's likely to work in counseling and coaching, and possibly then in teams and possibly in organizations, and all that range on the horizon began to open up. And the first sessions we did, I think we titled The Quest for What Works.
Yes, that's right, we did.
We thought this idea of what works and how do we get to it quickly was important, and that could all be completely detached from any kind of therapeutic context or even quasi-therapeutic conversation. So we were lucky not to be therapists to be able to make that transition. We went to Vienna for a conference on systemic work, broad systemic gathering, systemic management in Vienna. I think that's where I had my first conversation with Steve. I saw him coming towards me down a very long corridor in this United Nations building on some strange pentagon or circular design architecturally. As I was approaching him down this long corridor, I was the only one going that way. He was the only one going the other way. I thought, right, here's my chance for a conversation with the great man. He looked at me, he said, "Have you seen Insu?" And I pointed towards where I'd last seen Insu. That was the start of a beautiful relationship. What happened in Vienna that was significant for what we're talking about here?
Well, it was billed as the world's first systemic management conference, which it wasn't. Stafford Beer was one of the speakers, and he said that he hosted the first one of those in 1948. But there you go. But what was significant, we gave a workshop, but there were other people there on the same journey. So we met Peter Szabo, we met Peter Ruhrig, Insu was doing a workshop there as well. And we had already got a kind of initial version of the book, and we're planning a conference to launch the book the following year. And so we got Peter Szabo, Peter Ruhrig, and one or two others on board, and they said they'd come, which was immensely important in the long run. And we're still, of course, great friends with those people, well in touch with them. So it was a kind of key moment of connecting with this sort of European scene. And we've been going to EBTA conferences for several years and been made very welcome there, running workshops about how you work with teams and things like that. And the therapists were always very welcoming of these kind of apparent outsiders. And that's the SF world is like that. And it still is like that. It's very open. You want to use this, you want to come along, that's fine. Your professional background is not really of any concern. And that's still, I hope, the case.
We almost said no therapists for the first conference. We weren't quite so brutal. It was aimed very much at this organizational grouping that we'd begun to discover and begun to pull together. And some therapists came, which was fine. And then skipping 5 years, Insu came and did keynote and workshops with us. So if there was any kind of division, that was remended by then. So we had the first conference in Bristol, and we had the idea of the book, and we launched the book at the second conference.
So we launched the book at the first conference. I have to jump here, but the book appeared at the first conference. There is the first edition with the black cover, and there's a pile of them. And there's a very young Louis Kaufman getting his copy from a very young you and me.
Very young us.
Bristol in 2002. And we held the first Soul World Conference, what turned into the Soul World Conferences, to bring it together anyone who was interested in this organizational way of using these tools. And 80 people came, rather to our surprise. And we fortunately booked an expandable conference room. So that went very well. And that started what became the Soul World Network. And of course, that's still running. Even now. And this was the first SF coaching and organizational change book. And it was quite a success, within the context of the business book world. We had a good publisher, Nick Brealey, who also had people like Peter Senge and Otto Sharma on his list.
John Whitmore.
And John Whitmore, yes, the coaching guru. And one of the things to notice about the first edition of the book was we couldn't, at that time, solution focus was thought of in terms of questions. And when you watch Stephen Insu on the videos, sometimes the title comes up as miracle question or scaling question. And we could see that in the management world, the relationship is not necessarily helper and helpee, which it always is in the therapy world. So we needed to rethink the practice out of that relationship and into some other potentially different relationships, like manager-worker, which is a different relationship, or a coach client, or consultant organization, or even colleague to colleague. And so we conceived of two ways to do that. One is the 6 simple principles, which are the principles that we think underlie solution-focused work, and we still stand by that 22 years later. And the other was our 6 solutions tools, which were not questions, but were names for chunks of conversation. And we stick by that as well. The emphasis of some of these things has changed a bit. But the idea of when you ask it, for example, a miracle question, we called it the future perfect tool, trying to be clever and grammatical and punning in English, and then realize that around the world nobody has a clue what that means.
Very limited success.
Yes, but the idea was that when you ask a miracle question, you just don't ask a question; you're opening up a whole chunk of conversation. And actually, the bang from that comes not from the miracle question, but from the unpacking of the answers as that goes along, and it's still true, even more true than it was then, probably.
Absolutely. And looking back, before the book was accepted, we had a conversation with Nicholas Brearley. So Nicholas Brearley is the name of a man and the name of his own publishing company. And we selected Nicholas Brearley as the publisher we wanted to work with because he'd published John Whitmore's book on coaching, which is probably the biggest book on coaching that there's ever been, introduced the GROW model, which remains popular today. And Brearley said, you're not ready to write this book. There's not enough cases from around the world. There's not enough specific information. It's too weighted towards ideas and not enough to practice. And that was very wise advice. And we came back to him a year later with a rewrite. And it was then that he said, yes, he'll take it. And he helped to position it in this market for not therapeutic, but organizational change. And I'm going to echo a couple of things Mark said. That we're very keen on it being seen as a conversational technology. So if you want change, you can institute all kinds of systems, and some of them are very complicated and very expensive. But talking is a cheap technology, and the simplicity of the ideas, when well applied, is what makes this very effective. Should we pause a moment and see if anyone has got specific memories themselves of any of these events and conferences and what they noticed going on at the time or in retrospect? I'm thinking Jenny, Anton, Jonas, Stephen, you've all been around for this as long as we have, without giving away too much about your ages. Do you want to jump in with anything that's struck you or resonating with you on what we've been talking about so far?
All right. It's just so nice to hear the two of you talking, and in a way I don't want to interrupt, just carrying on with the two of you talking. And without giving away any ages, it's very nice to be reminded of things. It's good for old people to be taken back through their life. And so that's been really good. I am going to back to Vienna, when when you started to meet some of these other people. I was there, but as somebody who enjoyed the social activities afterwards, realizing that there were people doing things, and this idea that we had of bringing people together specifically to talk about SF in organizations, it was really quite exciting. Peter Szabo was the first person to hand money over and come. Peter Röhrig, Klaus Schenk, lots of the people who are still very active. And it's very nice to be reminded of all of that.
I think it's good to be reminded that we shouldn't underrate Jenny's contribution. Mark and I are surly old gits, broadly speaking. I think I can speak for Mark to that extent. Whereas Jenny is very hospitable, friendly, and good to talk to, and has been absolutely integral to the atmosphere of all the Soul World events and much else in the wider community. Jonas, Anton, Stephen, or anyone else?
Yeah, hi. One thing, and good afternoon, everybody. One thing sticks in my mind is one of your CDs
Oh,
on
yes.
consulting, and my wife and I listened to it a number of times as we drove down back and forth from Cornwall on holidays and things because it was very convenient and it was so succinct. And I said to my wife today, "Oh, I think Paul Mark will be around," and she remembers this particular video about really taking it into consulting world and things. And that I don't know where the CD is now. I'd love to hear it again, but it's in my office somewhere. But we played it a number of times, and it was another. Instead of the usual book format, it was actually great to have something in a different format we could just listen to whilst driving. Very
Thank you,
relaxing
Stephen.
too.
That's good to know. I still have copies available in cassette form. Anyone still got cassette in your old cars? No. I do take them around and try and give them away with very little success. And we still got the streaming version, which is accessible through the solutionsfocus.co.uk website. Don't know if you've got it, Mark, but I have one other story about the CD in a moment.
I send
Okay.
it out as a download for people
Yes.
doing my big course even now, and it stands up more or less. Maybe we can try and see what we can do. To share it.
I used to work as a comedy producer for the BBC in radio, so we had access to good editing and knew how to sharpen up that conversation and turn it into a product. The additional story about that CD is in the previous place that I lived. I'm now in Oxford, but it was previously in St Albans. There was a party wall to the next door neighbours who were noisy at times. Different neighbours moved in and out. And for the ones that were noisy, I would put that CD on loop, high volume, next to the wall to drive them mad. So it has its uses. So let's move on then. And please think of other things that you'd like to contribute either in the chat or by speaking out openly. And Caroline has put one in the chat, which is great. Thank you. There are 3 editions. So we had that first edition, which we've been speaking about. What happened that made the second edition significant, would you say, Mark?
So the second edition, I was trying to get Nick really to do a field book, and he wouldn't. So that then we wrote a series of people from the Soul community wrote various cases, and we did a special edition of the journal Organizations and People, and then that turned into a book, which is called Positive Approaches to Change, which is now quite hard to get. But I kept on at Nick really to do a field book, and he wouldn't. But he did offer a second edition, but he said economics, but you can only change the second half, which is the sort of the cases and the examples bit. So we had to leave the first 8 chapters alone, which is frustrating, but there we are. But we added the Oscar coaching model, which we'd actually been using since the year 2000. We devised it for Walker's Snack Foods here in the UK. In fact, I'm sure we did. And it was it was a good success. And so, but we put into the second edition, and also lots more cases and stories that we had built up over 5 years of Soul World events and talking to people and so on. So some much better examples in the second half of the book came in, and a better cover and a better subtitle, Making Coaching and Change Simple, and a quote from John Whitmore on the front.
The quote from John Whitmore was because we saw him speak. We knew he was going to speak. We went to see him speak at a conference. I don't think we agreed with the word he said.
No.
At the time. It was a very strange presentation. But I approached him afterwards and said, please read this. Please, can we have a quote? We've got more sophisticated, and he said yes, and gave us that lovely quote. We've got more sophisticated in asking for quotes since. We write them ourselves and then send them to people saying, would you mind putting your name to this? It saves them a lot of time and energy. So those of you that are writing books and want to get some cover quotes, that's my tip for that. So the second edition came out, and we were all very happy with that for a decade.
That was 2007.
Say again?
That was 2007. The second edition
Yes,
came
indeed.
out, and there it sat as our kind of piece of work.
And that was fine, because we were writing other books ourselves, and lots of other people were now writing books. So on solution focus in organization. So there was a growing bookshelf in which that sat in its place alongside all of these others. And that may well have been that for the writing of this particular book. But then something odd happened about 6 months ago.
Well, it's a year ago now.
Is it? Time speeds up for me.
Yes. Somebody wanted to buy the Turkish rights for the second edition. And the publishers, Nick Brealey had retired. It was part of Hachette now. The new publishers, of course, they sold the Turkish rights. So they're keen on making money as anyone. But then they said, just a minute, this book seems to be selling, getting on for 1,000 copies a year, 20 years after it came out, with no visible means of promotion at all. Something is unusual and happening about this book. And they said, if you want to do a third edition, we would be keen. And I hadn't worked with Paul for many years at that stage, but we got in touch, and I said, look, how about this? How about it? Would feel like a lifetime achievement award to have this book that we wrote more than 20 years ago.
Your Oscar for surviving.
Oscar for surviving, yes. And so we reworked it about this time last year. We handed it in at the end of August, and we've been gathering new endorsements and so on since then. And here it is, and you see the new cover there. And it really is fully revised. There is not a page that doesn't have a change on it, although you'd have to look pretty sharply to see some of them. Some of them are just Paul's editorial skill, making it smoother to read. But the overall structure of the simple principles and 6 solution tools is the same. But within that, we've expanded, we've refined, we've smoothed it out. We've added in some of the things that have come along in the meantime, like my stuff on next generation solution focus and descriptions and dialogic OD work and emergence and complexity, which is now more of a feature of the landscape than it was back when we wrote the first edition. It's if you look at the manuscript we sent in, it's an absolute blizzard of track changes. But actually, the thing reads really well, and I'm very, very happy that we've emerged with this.
I'd like to invite Ed Smith to speak at this point, because when we were revising it, I thought, what would a young person think? Particularly someone who's new to solution focus. I know Ed through the world of improvisation. We're both part of the Awkward Actors team. I direct it and Ed performs in it. And he's interested in organizations and change, and is literate, which is a good thing in people even now. So I gave him an early revised version and asked him if he could take out all the sexism and all the racism. And what did you make of it when you read it, and what needed changing, particularly in that updating it to make it speak to a modern audience?
Thank you for the introduction. It's very nice to be learning about solutions focus in a concentrated way today. Yes, Paul asked me to have a look at the book last year, and it was my first introduction to solutions focus. I'm very interested in organizations and well, in problem talk, how badly they work together. A lot of the time, I have a background in motorsport, and whilst you might think that's an sort of area that's famed for its speed, it's also very inefficient. Anyway, I enjoyed the book immensely, and I saw lots of useful tips and tricks of how we can install change. So it was my first approach to solutions focus. I'm not sure I'm the best for removing sexism and outdated ideas from books, but what I did enjoy was focusing on diagrams. Diagrams are the things that I'm most interested in, I think, from memory. This is a year ago. So I had a few things to say about the useful diagrams and how I thought they could be improved. I think that's all I have to say, but I enjoyed the book and looking forward to rereading it again and
thanks, Ed. I think
where to go next with solution focus.
You understate a little bit your contributions. There were things that of people sitting at their desks to work in their office or weekly commutes and things that used to happen before COVID that don't, and technologies had changed. So
and CDs
were not to be mentioned anymore. I will say, though, that the oldest and strangest reference of all remains in the book. Mark knows what I'm talking about. Tell us, Mark.
So this is the bit that I put in the first edition. It's a quote. It's a quote from Round the Horn, which was a radio comedy show of the 1960s, and there were two characters on this program called Dame Celia Molestrangler and Binky Huckaback, who did these pastiches of 1930s films, but everyone's terribly, 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 terribly. And at one point, they have this exchange, which is it's so dreadful, Charles. It's everything matters. And the other one says, and yet none of it matters. And yet everything matters. And yet none of it matters. And it goes on like this. And this is a kind of, this is a good summary of what to think about causes. You can find a million causes and they could all matter, and yet none of them matters when you're working in a solution-focused way. And so we use it in the chapter about beware of causes with this quote. And I managed to keep it in. We kept it in. I fought for it with the editor and my co-author.
Yes.
I'm still a great fan of Round the Horn, and if you know what I'm talking about, you'll know about it. And if you don't, well, go and dig out Around the Horn and listen to it from somewhere.
Available on BBC Archives.
Yes.
Every edition. It's still very, very funny. But we've tried not to be too self-indulgent in the book, and that anything that we brought in from these other worlds that we're interested in had to justify its place by having a very direct connection with a solution-focused approach. So let's talk about inside the new edition. Is there a slide for that?
There is, yes.
A bit more detail on what we did.
Just to draw attention to the cover quote, which is from Dr. Ivan Meisner, the founder of BA. He says, "This book will help us deal with the challenges of our times in intelligent and innovative ways." All right. So he gets it, and I hope everyone else will as well.
Do we know who these other people are who've given us endorsements? So Michael Barber was the head of the delivery unit and founder of the delivery unit for the Tony Blair government, and he works on delivery, getting things done for governments around the world now as a consultant. I went to university with him and still closely in touch, so I was able to get to him.
Raymond Aaron is an American-based success coach. And in a way, he loves solution focus, but his style is very bright. But actually, he had me along to talk about
earlier on in their.
He had me along to talk about solution focus a lot of times, and he loves it. and he's in the book. He's got a story in the book as well.
Neil Malarkey, improviser, one of the Comedy Store Players, longest running show on the British stage in the Guinness Book of Records. Bit part player in the films of Mike Myers, who was his comedy double act partner for a couple of years. And he works as an organizational coach and likes solution focused approach and sees the connections with improvisation.
Pete Bissonnette is based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and he runs a company called Learning Strategies, who've done all sorts of kind of self-help stuff over the years. And Paul and I did a section of one of his modules a very long time ago, but he started using SF on himself and his company. And so we talk about that in the book, and he's given us a nice quote. And
Dan Abrahams came on our course long ago, and he's a sports psychologist and has a very good podcast called The Sports Psych, Psych, where he interviews all kinds of people, mostly sports performers or sports coaches, and likes the approach. And Elliot Connie, leader in the expansion and development of solution focus, particularly in the United States.
Yeah, so those are some of the new endorsements we've got. We've kept quite a few of the other ones as well, but it's a great. I think it's a great cast of people to be endorsing, enthusiastic.
Nicholas, who's here on this call, one of your comments is in the cover as well, so thank you for that. We've worked with Nicholas for many years.
So what's inside the book? Well, we stick with and renew our 6 simple principles and 6 solutions tools, which is the foundation of the thing. I think we started very early that we can't mess with that, because that would be a new book if we changed that. So we kept that basic structure, but we've got more in about next generation description building, more in about more refined ways of SF practice, and using detail in particular, and these follow-up questions like what difference would that make and who would be the first to notice. There was some of that was there already, but we've put it more forward, of course, to encourage people to do that. We've made explicit connections to dialogic organization development, and I'm working with Jervis Bush in that area at the moment, and also the enactivist post-Wittgensteinian philosophy of mind and cognitive science. And I've been working with people like Dan Hutto on that. And so all of those connections, which were implicit to start with, we've made much more explicit and tried to sort of connect it as clearly as we can with other fields. And then there are some new cases in detail as well, and there are lots more than this, but a few of the ones I would pick out anyway. Resistance in Sky TV, a wonderful little case from Trevor Durnford, who's an old friend of ours, organizational consultant. A whole session about an Australian school lead team strategy workshop from Jason Pascoe in Australia. Reorganization of the Austrian Parliament, not the political bit, but the administrative bit, from Susanna Bergstaller, who worked with them over a number of years in a very gentle and nice solution-focused way. And finally, the way of working in the city of Hatsukaichi in Japan, where, again, our lovely long-term colleague Yasutaro Aoki, many of you will know Aoki-san, has been working for many years with this prefecture in Japan about how they work with each other and how they work with the residents. And so those are some of the new cases that are in the book. And I think it's an even more impressive lineup now than it was for the second edition.
Thanks, Mark. I would say from a writing perspective, it's very interesting to be able to go back and look at something that you originally wrote, or in this case, interestingly, co-wrote that long ago. So I could sit here muttering, oh, that's all Mark's fault, and that's a nice bit, probably mine, or vice versa, and treat it very dispassionately, in fact, for how it could be improved on a rewrite. and we had a good go at that. So if you've got old things you've written, Stephen's written about 1,000 books, and I don't know how much you do revising of them, but it's a fun process. And anyone thinking of writing, I would encourage that for several reasons. The two main ones being you get to articulate and express what it is you are thinking about and doing, and get that out into the world. So you have to commit to, this is what I'm saying, and I'm willing for people to have a look at that. And that seems a very healthy process. And from a community perspective, we need the writing that we all do, because SF is still a minority sport, and the credibility that it gets, the clients it will attract for people, and the gathering body of knowledge, filling a shelf, seems important too. Maybe you speak to that as well, Mark, with your editorial journal hat and blogging hat, and then we'll see how other people feel about the growing bookshelf and some of their potential or existing contributions to it.
Yeah, so I over the years I've spent a lot of time with Jenny on putting out solution focused material. So we did positive approaches to change, collection of articles. We did this Soul case book, solutions focused working, which is about to appear on Kindle for the first time, so it'll be easier to get. With Anton and others, we did 16 issues of the Interaction Journal in print, and those papers are all now archived on my website. And working with soul organizations, and there's been a lot of stuff out there. But I've now kind of expanded I'm not a therapist, and I'm still not a therapist, but find a sort of position in the therapy world as a sort of short thought leader, and writing for people like the Journal of Systemic Therapies as well. So I'll be running a session with Anton 3 o'clock UK time on the Journal of Solution Focused Practice, but I put the link in the chat. It's free to read and it's free to write for, and we love people to write for it. And of course, in the organizational world, there's now SFIO as well, which is a very, very good body that works closely with Soul World community, but it's a professional organization that people pay in, and so it has money and resources to do things.
Perhaps the weakest area on the bookshelf is solid research. And we have case studies, and there's a lot of anecdotal and qualitative research. And I think this is true for therapy as well, that the hard quantitative research that impresses institutions is still scant.
There's more coming, and there are
Caroline's waving.
Yeah, there are now more and more things, and the Journal of Solution Focused Practice is covering those and pulling those together. But you're right, and particularly in the organizational sphere, I wrote a chapter on this more than 10 years ago and made the point that no organization will find that their approach is failing and carry it through to the end and write it up just for the scientific rigor of it. Of course they won't do that. They'd be idiots. They will change their approach and try and do something that's more effective. And so it doesn't work. It's not like in therapy or even in coaching where you have lots of chances to do this kind of broadly the same thing. Organizational change projects are very unique and bespoke. So trying to do research past case studies on that is really quite hard.
It is difficult. I'm encouraging it for the ones that are more repeatable, measurable, that parallel the research, like for positive psychology, which there's loads, many papers. Caroline, did you want to comment?
Yes, I just wanted to add that based on your book for Great Deal, your first book and second book, I have, together with Ben Furman, created a special method for children and for adolescents, and we brought that to the educational field and to the field of social work here in Holland. And even with the National Health Institute here in Holland, we have made a really big pilot for 12 and 16-year-olds based on your work that has now been run for like 10 years and has been researched, officially researched by the Trimbos Institute, which is, I think, one of the biggest research institutes in the world. And they have approved and accredited now this method as well, as done with thorough research and supported not just by evidence-based, but also by scientific research. So we're working on it. That's what I wanted to tell you.
That's fantastic,
Yeah.
and thank you. And maybe
Yes,
send me a note about this sometime.
Yes,
so
I can do
look in
that.
detail.
Yes,
I'd love
but
to.
the method is already going around the world.
Yeah.
It's now been printed in China. It's now going to Poland. We have it in English at Routledge, and so it's really going around the globe right now. So you have started something that has created many.
Very pleased to hear it. And in passing, the Solutions Focus book is in 25 something like that languages.
Yeah.
We get sent copies occasionally, which I understand nothing, because sometimes they're not even in the same alphabet, and try and give them away when I occasionally meet people from those places. I met someone Japanese who I was delighted to give copy to last month. Mark?
The English version has sold well in excess of 30,000 copies to this point without the new edition, which somebody I spoke to rated that makes it the second best-selling coaching book after John Whitmore. Anyway, I don't know about that, but in these terms, 30,000, more than 30,000 copies is a good result.
And yet, still not enough to make you a fortune.
Well, nobody makes a fortune out of business writing, that's for sure.
No, not co-writing anyway, so you only get half of it. But well worth it for every other reason. Who would like to comment, reflect, reminisce, postulate, speculate on the bookshelf idea of solution-focused writing, your own thoughts, things you might have started doing or accomplished doing, as Caroline has done, that would add to this conversation? If not, we'll all go home.
I'm just wondering, what is it that makes the silence so deep right now?
I think we've worn people out and stunned them into silence.
Yeah, Paul, since we've been talking, I've already organised a book review for one of the journals I edit. So this has been very productive already. So you will have your book reviewed.
Thank you.
For sure.
Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate that and support throughout the years. Yeah. I don't know if you remember, we met at a Sage party and had a glass of champagne together.
Yes, those are the days.
Those were the days. Yes. As I said, Stephen's written loads in both book and magazine journal form. Thank you. Anyone else got some thoughts or things that they'd like to share?
My silence, Paul and Mark, came from the absolute deep appreciation for what you've done, the book you've written so many years ago, and all that it made possible. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Anton.
Thank you, Anton.
Yeah, I'd love to echo that. Yeah, it's. I mean, you're worthy of all praise, and I'm just flabbergasted that you've stuck with it. That is 3 editions and all this work around the books, and your passion to keep it going. I think that's. I mean, you're both thought leaders. I think you're both exploring and expanding and still curious and still writing and still wanting to get this thing out there. And I think I'm just immensely grateful for just how you're sticking with it and keeping it going. I think there's another 30,000 copies to be sold, and this new version is going to make that happen.
We're thinking 300,000, Jonas.
Oh well, I'll start with 30, and then we'll take the next.
My dream is to see it in a railway station or an airport.
There's something about small steps, which
Yeah, people keep telling me.
does
But thank
resonate.
you very much for those kind comments.
I have
So
a
on screen
question for
you
Jenny.
Karen Anton.
I have a question for Jenny. Jenny, 20 years on, does Mark, or did Mark finally figure out how to cut bread without getting crumbles everywhere?
You see, this is a story that there's a story that I don't think that the book renders accurately.
One of many, Jenny, one of many.
So for Mark and I live together, we're married, and for a long time, I had been saying, please, will you do something about these crumbs of, when I was tidying up, when I was tidying up. And after quite a long time of doing what wasn't working for either of us, Mark said, and I'm quoting, "I defy you. Show me how to cut bread without leaving crumbs." So it's not about cutting bread without leaving crumbs. It's about clearing them up afterwards. And now I think 70% of the time my work surfaces are crumb-free.
See, so not just organizational change, couples therapy as well.
I think since I've got the microphone open, I just say, as well as the fantastic ripple effects that these books have made at work, there are so many people whose faces I'm seeing now that we have really, really good friendships have emerged, really good working relationships, really good friendships. And thank you both, and thank everybody else for making those things such an important part of many of our lives.
Well, this has turned out far better than I was expecting as a session. It's lovely to hear these things. Thank you so much. Anyone like to say anything else that's not in any kind of compliment to us, but about what's out there, what might be coming next, writing, books, and so forth? Another deep and meaningful silence. Jason, hello.
Hi to you. Hi. First of all, I've got to say something witty. I put it in the chat and saying that I am a better husband because of solutions of focus practice. My wife and I are probably together, a lot happier because of because of us not shining a light on issues. But I would say that something from having sort of conversations, with Mark in the past has actually been very generous with his time and has made sort of time to sort of have chat with me. And I think for me, something that I am currently sort of writing about, contributing to a sort of a book, is looking at how the strength of purpose, and it's nothing new, but how the strength of purpose is perhaps something old that connects to perhaps some of the comments to do with, or aspects to do with well-being and hope, and it's trying to make an alignment, I suppose, to things that perhaps have always been around, but actually perhaps are being expressed with different nuance, but to trying to make sense of the fact that there are some things that are really fundamental that if you can identify a sense of purpose, or regarding organizational change, a united sense of purpose, then there can be purposeful, positive change. And that's something that I'm really interested in. And I'm currently working on a 3-year project with the Ministry of Education in Tonga, which is amazing. But really opening my eyes to the fact that there are things that I just don't understand that have to get down to a very, very human level, really human level, to be able to create meaningful and purposeful change. So I hope I didn't ramble too much there.
Thanks, Jason. I'm glad to hear when people say I'm writing things. So anyone else want to tell us their writing plans? Anton, it's surely time for more books from you. Your resilience book is pre-COVID.
We've written another one during the COVID pandemic. That's how we spent the lockdown. We've written a book with my three. I've written a book with my 3 colleagues, which is a new version of the older book. Yeah.
Okay.
But it's only published in Dutch. Wendbaar als het woelig wordt is the title.
That's clever, because that's not your first language, is it?
Dutch.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Oh, it is. I thought it was English.
Thanks.
Any other comments or contributions? We've got 5 minutes to the next session, so quite happy to stop the recording and give you a break, decide where to go next. Let's do that.
So just to say in conclusion, I put this in the chat a little while ago, thesolutionsfocus.com is the website for everything about the new book, all the details, the preface you can read there for free. You can buy the book, order the book, and see all the details. So that's the place. And if you want to point people to it, and please, next Thursday, May the 9th, is publication day in the UK anyway. If you can point people to that on that day, that would be really, really helpful. And I will be writing more about the book on my Substack, which comes out every Wednesday at 4:30 next week. And the address for that is also in the chat, free to subscribe. And if you want to read new stuff from me every week, that's the place to be doing it. And thanks all for joining us.
It's really impressive, your Substack, Mark. I keep reading it thinking, how does he get to write this much so consistently? You can get my occasional ramblings via my website, Paul at Impro, and my Solution Focus website, Paul at solutionsfocus.co.uk, wwws for each of those. Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you very much, everybody, for your contributions and for being here.